Suspensions are really meant for bills that do not bring the level of complexity, the level of controversy that a bill like this brings to the House floor, and as a result, I urge a no vote.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Speaker, reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve at this time. I have one more speaker, and I have a right to close.
Gentleman reserves.
Mr.
Gentleman
Speaker,
from New Mexico.
I yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, 3 minutes.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, has stated the facts very clearly. In the 1950s, the federal government condemned and seized land and water rights owned by the Tohono O'odham Indian Nation. In 1986, Congress settled the tribe's outstanding claims by agreeing in part to take into trust replacement land that the Tohono O'odham might acquire under specific conditions. The tribe has acquired a particular parcel meeting all of the conditions set forth in the law and asserted its rightful claim under that law. This bill retroactively and fundamentally alters that settlement, breaking the promises the Tohono O'odham have relied upon as they spent many years and millions of dollars acquiring this parcel and planning the project. Now, why in the world would we want to do such a thing? Well, it's obvious. Like many tribes, the Tohono O'odham want to build a casino on this land. Now, this casino would compete with another tribe's casino in the region, and that tribe doesn't want the competition. Competition is so annoying and inconvenient. It requires offering your customers a better service at a lower price. Tohono O'odham seeks to do that. The other tribe doesn't want to. So that other tribe, which has a monopoly on gaming in the Phoenix area, created a front made up of anti-gambling pressure groups and NIMBY activists to try and stop them. They have been defeated in the courts at every turn. So what to do? What to do? They don't want to compete for customers. They don't have a leg to stand on in court. What is left? Well, of course, get Congress to break its promise, which is why we're all here tonight. Let's be very clear about what passing this bill would mean. Many in this House have rightly criticized the President for killing thousands of jobs to satisfy his ideological commitment, or opposition rather, to the Keystone Pipeline. Well, this bill does exactly the same thing. It kills 6,000 construction jobs and 3,000 permanent ongoing service jobs by blocking this project on ideological grounds. But the damage only begins there. Federal taxpayers will become liable for hundreds of millions of dollars of economic damages to compensate the Tohono O'odham for lost profits, for the devaluation of their property, and for years of planning suddenly rendered worthless by this act. So what's the balance sheet here? On the plus side, we satisfy the ideological itch of anti-gaming busybodies and anti-growth zealots, and we protect a gambling monopoly in Phoenix from any competition. On the minus side, we destroy 6,000 construction jobs, 3,000 service jobs, and we open our constituents to hundreds of millions of dollars of damages that we are certain to lose in court. I'd suggest that this bill ought to be laughed off the floor, but there's nothing in it to laugh about.
Gentleman yields.
Speaker, reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alaska.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I come to this with a somewhat unique view because I was actually there 19 years ago as the majority whip in the Arizona State House when this was originally being negotiated. I sat in the rooms hour after hour after hour for months with many of these Native American communities and these very discussions about what would happen in this type of scenario and the assurances that were given to those of us who were in the legislature, who are having to make this decision, that this would never happen. And I've listened to a little bit of this testimony, even from my good friend here from California, and the facts don't line up. First off, in the gaming agreements, in the compacts, there's the language about the distance from the base Aboriginal territories and how far things could move away from that. This is outside that. The jobs numbers are an absolute fantasy for the construction. And I think Mr. Franks actually went over that in his discussion earlier. But why do I stand here so passionately supporting Trent's bill? If this happens, it's going to destroy the nature of my state. Because understand, the compacts go kaboom, that the cascade begins. And this isn't just for Arizona. It will be all over the country. I promise you, in a few years, you will wake up and my state will be a statewide gaming state. And then when this becomes precedent, understand all your states are now in play. This is more than just us being, having a dispute with the Tohono O'odhams. That isn't what this is about. This is about keeping the promises that were made for many of us who were embattled in building these compacts years ago. Let's have everyone keep their promise, and let's keep the deal we made. And with that,
Gentleman yields.
Will the gentleman yield for a moment? If he doesn't have the time, I'll give him an additional. Do the tribe in question, do they have a casino on their own property?
oh, yeah, I think they have multiple casinos. And there was like another fact that bounced up here, Mr. Speaker. There's actually, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 casinos in the urban area by, I think, 3 different Native American communities. This isn't about defending one, tribe versus another. This is about, there's 21 tribes in Arizona. And, the agreements that have been put together, heaven forbid what you're going to do to these communities, particularly the rural ones that get some of the sharing, if we blow up the compacts through my state.
Thank you.
And with that, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman's time expired. Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Speaker, does the gentleman have any more speakers?
Mr. Speaker, yes, I do.
Then I reserve it this time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from New Mexico is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, as much time as he may consume.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Lujan. Just, I think, important points to clarify. One is that the nation, Tohono O'odham Nation's proposed gaming facility in this land that was authorized by Congress would violate its Tribal State Gaming Compact, or Prop 202. The Department of Interior has spoken clearly on this issue and confirmed in Section 3J of the Tribal State Gaming Compact clearly allows the nation to develop a gaming facility of the land. Nothing in Proposition 202 would disallow the nation from gaming in the Phoenix metropolitan area, as the other 5 to 6 casinos show. That there was a gentleman agreement for no additional casinos in Phoenix. Well, there was no such side deal. The line of argument is, I think, after the fact rationalization for a position that is entirely unsupported by the letter of the law, the compact, and all elements of, as stated, all elements of Tribal State Gaming Agreement must be embodied in the compact and must be approved by the Department of Interior. And I think that we have to look what has not been said. The United States breach, if this becomes law, will void the nation's release of its original land claims and open the United States to a liability that was valued at $100 million in 1986 dollars. The breach will also open the portion of the nation's original water claims settlement. This settlement is key to the negotiations going on now with Salt River Project, the Central Arizona Water Conservation District, the State of Arizona, the Maricopa-Stanfield Water District, and the Central Arizona Irrigation Districts, all affecting the very precious commodity in Arizona, which is water. So at the expense of those liabilities, and that breach could cost not only the State of Arizona, but the United States taxpayer millions and millions of dollars, and loss in settlements that are so vitally needed around the water issues affecting Arizona and the West. And with that, let me thank the Chairman and Mr. Lujan and yield back.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Alaska.
Mr. Chairman, I can say that this is somewhat difficult for me because I have a rule about laws that are being passed in members' districts, and I usually support Mr. Franks represents that district. And I will say Mr. Alvo has made some statements that I would suggest that Congress makes laws and Congress can remake laws. Lawsuits, that's a scare tactic. They can sue all they want. One of the problems we have in America today is we have too many lawyers, and you can sue anything and anybody, anytime, anywhere. This is a battle about a state and a large group of American natives that reached an agreement. Mr. Kozar said this very clearly. He was there, and they reached an agreement, and they are signatories. We had a hearing on this legislation. We had a quite intensive hearing, and that was brought up. And of course, they can cite all the arguments they want, but they also understand that when the state's involved under the native gaming laws, which I and Mo Udall sponsored, the state had to be directly involved. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gambling any place in Arizona, because the state probably would not have agreed to that if there hadn't been an agreement between all the tribes. There would be no more than was established in the Compact. And I think we have to consider the state's belief in this, because that does affect the state. It probably wouldn't have any gambling at all. This money from those existing 5 casinos is shared even by the tribe requesting this casino outside their territory, where they have their own casinos. They want it in the Phoenix area, and we all know that. And this is about money. There's no doubt about that. But what concerns me the most is the Compact. And when I listen to this, when you make an agreement and you're a tribe and you agree to something, don't try to go around and try to change that later on by asking some lawyers. When we talk about finances and where the finances are coming from, we could find that out too later on. So I yield back the balance of my time with understanding this is an Arizona battle, but as chairman I have to listen to both sides. And right now I come down on the side that Arizona, the state of, has an agreement, and we ought to live by it. Yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Alaska yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2938 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Yes, on that I request the ayes and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed.
First request, Mr. Jones.
Okay, Susan, I'm going to do the personal request.
The chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leaves of absence requested for Mr. Griffin of Arkansas for today and Mr. Schilling of Illinois for today.
Without objection, the requests are granted. For what purposes does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Speaker, the crisis in Syria is getting worse and worse and worse. I join with the United Nations, but I ask that the Arab League and NATO raise their voices to remove women and children and elderly and the disabled and the sick from this onslaught of violence. And I ask the head of Russia, Mr. Putin, does he have a heart? Is he going to continue on the basis of ego and collaboration, determined that he allows the violence against the Syrian people to continue? I ask my Christian friends in Syria as well to join with the world of humanity to stop the violence against women and children. It is time now. Mr. Speaker, I change to another topic very quickly and say that one vote, one person. The voter ID law doesn't allow that, and the massive infusion of dollars coming from places that no one knows, no one has to account for. Let us have the Constitution stand again. Let America have a 2012 election without the infusion of unnamed dollars. Now $100 million may be coming into this election from one person.
The
Mr.
gentlelady's
Speaker,
time has expired.
the Constitution deserves respect. One vote, one person. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I won't take the entire hour, but this is a 10-year journey that I have been on since I was notified by the wife of one of the pilots, Connie Gruber, who lives in my district, that the plane crashed very tragically on April the 8th of 2000, where 19 Marines were killed in a V-22 Osprey, that her husband, Major Brooks Gruber, and Colonel John Brow, pilot, were being blamed for an accident. 19 Marines that night were killed, and again, 10 years ago, I was contacted by Mrs. Gruber, who lives in Jacksonville, North Carolina, which is the home of Camp Lejeune Marine Base. And Mr. Speaker, I have for the House a photograph of the V-22 Osprey that many people might have forgotten. In the year 2000, it was a plane going through a lot of trouble, meaning from the standpoint of testing, standpoint of records being changed, and standpoint of Secretary of Defense at the time, Dick Cheney, wanted to scrap the program. But the Marine Corps was saying that they had to have the MV-22. And again, Mr. Speaker, for you to know, this is the plane that goes from a helicopter mode to an airplane mode, that the nacelles will go from this way to a plane mode. And I have this beside me so that people can see the V-22. The pilot was Colonel John Brow. He's immediately on my left, and the co-pilot to his left, or the poster's left, was Major Brooks Gruber. Connie Gruber wrote me a letter. It was a full page, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to just read what she said, just one paragraph. With so many wrongs in the world we cannot make right, I ask you, prayerfully consider an injustice that you can make right. I realize you alone may not be able to amend the report, but you can certainly support my efforts to permanently remove this black mark from my husband's honorable military service record. Mr. Speaker, there was at a time an issue involving the V-22 that the Marine Corps did not recognize, nor did Bell Boeing, the manufacturer of the plane. It was called Vortex Ring State. It's VRS, and it's where the two helicopter nacelles can be impacted in a different way. And that's what caused this tragic accident on April the 8th of 2000. Mr. Speaker, right after the accident, the Marine Corps sent 3 investigators, Colonel Mike Morgan, Colonel Ron Radish, and Major Phil Stackhouse to Arizona to investigate this accident, which was very, very difficult for the Marines who were given the responsibility to find out why this plane crashed and burned. Mr. Speaker, they came back and completed what was known as the Jagman Report that was submitted to the Marine Corps. The investigators, this was their findings of what caused the accident. This is what has created the problem, is that the Marine Corps issued a press release that I will talk about in just a few minutes. And the Jagman, the families agree with. Everything in the Jagman they agree with. And I'll touch on that in just a moment. I also at this time want to thank Congressman Steny Hoyer from Maryland, who is a congressman for the wife of the pilot. Her name is Trish Brow. She has two sons, Michael and Matthew. Mr. Hoyer has joined me in clearing the names of these two pilots, and I want to thank him tonight for that. In addition, Congressman Norm Dix from the state of Washington, who will be leaving this year, has heard me speak on the floor about this accident, and he also wants to join in clearing the names of these two pilots. Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank Attorney Jim Furman in Texas. Attorney Jim Furman represented Connie Gruber and Trish Brow in the lawsuit against Bell Boeing. In addition, Brian Alexander and his associate, Francis Young, were the attorneys for the 17 Marine families. So those two attorneys, Jim Furman and Brian Alexander, have joined me in clearing the names of John Brow and Brooks Gruber. And, Mr. Speaker, I must state that they won their case against Bell Boeing. The amount of money allotted to the families has been secured, so therefore no one knows except the families. But it tells me a whole lot when a manufacturing company decides that they would rather settle out of court than take the case to court. Phil Coyle, the Assistant Secretary of Defense and Director of Operational Tests and Evaluation in the Department of Defense at the time of this accident, has also joined us in clearing the names of the two pilots. Also, shortly after the accident in the year 2002, CBS 60 Minutes, led by Mike Wallace, who's now deceased, gave the story of what happened and why this plane crashed and why the two pilots should not be seen at fault. Mr. Speaker, there have been many people in this 10-year journey, from local press in eastern North Carolina all the way to press in Texas, have joined us in this effort to say to Connie and Trish Brow and their sons and their daughter, your husbands were not at fault. Why the Marine Corps will not join in this effort, I do not understand. All the Marine Corps has to do is to issue a paragraph that clearly states to Trish Brow that your husband, John Brow, Colonel John Brow, pilot, was not at fault for the accident that occurred on April the 8th of 2000 in Marana, Arizona. All the Marine Corps has to do is to write a paragraph on the Commandant's stationery to Connie Gruber stating the same thing, except your husband, Major Brooks Gruber, co-pilot, was not at fault for the accident that happened on April the 8th of 2000, Marana, Arizona. Mr. Speaker, you might think, and maybe some people watching tonight might think, well, why is this so difficult? The lawsuits are over. The plane is surviving. There's no threat to the Marine Corps that they're going to eliminate the V-22. It is part of their arsenal now. But this is what happened. A Marine Corps press release, July the 27th of the year 2000, states, and I quote for the record, unfortunately, the pilot's drive to accomplish that mission appears to have been the fatal factor. Mr. Speaker, the official Jagman investigation that I made reference to, Colonel Morgan, Colonel Radish, and Major Stackhouse, this is what they said in the Jagman. During this investigation, we found nothing that we would characterize as negligence, deliberate pilot error, or maintenance/material failure. Mr. Speaker, if the Marine Corps, after the Jagman report came out, would have released a press statement that would have said, after we have reviewed this Jagman report, it is now our determination, because of the Jagman report, that Colonel John Brow and Major Brooks Gruber were not at fault for this accident. Mr. Speaker, at the time of this accident, this issue of vortex ring state was not fully understood.
It was understood in the world of the helicopters, but not in the world of the V-22 Osprey. The Marine Corps did not understand, nor did the Bell Bowen understand, how the vortex ring state, how these pilots could have reacted. Mr. Speaker, in fact, at the time of the accident, the NATOPS manual that was given to the pilots of the V-22 and this night given to Colonel John Brow and Major Brooks Gruber, the NATOPS manual had absolutely nothing about the vortex ring state. It had one sentence. Since that time, the NATOPS manual for the Marine Corps and the Navy and the Air Force, Mr. Speaker, is 6 pages about vortex ring state and how you react to vortex ring state. Mr. Speaker, there are warning systems in the cockpit of the V-22 now that these two Marines never saw, never had, never understood, never knew about. But since that accident, Mr. Speaker, they now have a warning system that tells the pilots that you're in trouble. You're in trouble. And they even have in the helmets they carry, they wear, a voice of a woman said, "Sink, sink, sink," meaning you have to react to the sinking of this ship, this plane. Mr. Speaker, that's why tonight, and once a month, I'm coming down on the floor to talk about the fact that these Marines have every right to rest in peace. One's buried in Arlington Cemetery, that's Colonel John Brow, and the other, Major Brooks Gruber, is buried in the Veterans Cemetery down in Jacksonville, North Carolina, where his wife lives. Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank WTVD in Durham. They're bringing a film crew up tomorrow to interview Trish Brow and one of her sons. They will meet Mrs. Brow over at Arlington Cemetery. And this is why it does not make any sense why the Marine Corps will not issue a public statement and a paragraph to the two wives saying, after this many years and all the facts and all the testing and everything that we've done, there's no way that your husbands could have known what they were doing. Mr. Speaker, they were sitting in the air. They did not understand how to react to vortex ring state. The Marine Corps knew not how to explain to them how to react, and Bell Bowen had not done the proper research. Mr. Speaker, when I say proper research, after this accident, an additional accident, Tom McDonnell, a test pilot, spent 700 hours trying to figure out how the V-22 responds to vortex ring state and how the pilot should respond to vortex ring state. In fact, Mr. McDonnell deserved and he earned from the Test Pilots Association the Kinchlow Award for finding out and figuring out what you do when a plane gets into vortex ring state. Mr. Speaker, these two men would not have given their life and 17 Marines in the back of the plane if Bell Bowen had done its job and the Marine Corps had demanded that Bell Bowen understand vortex ring state and how it would impact the V-22. Mr. Speaker, very quickly, I'm going to close in just a few minutes, but I wanted to share with the record that when the Jagman said that this was not deliberate pilot error, I wrote to one of the investigators, Lieutenant Colonel Morgan, and I asked him how and why did you use the word deliberate pilot error in the Jagman report. And again, the families, we accept the Jagman report, but I did not quite understand. I'm not a pilot, not a Marine, never served, but I wanted to understand why. and I'd like to read this for the record. Colonel Morgan stated, and these are his words, "My personal feeling and opinion, supported by my interview with the lead flight crew, is that the mishap aircraft had no idea they had exceeded any flight parameters." Mr. Speaker, the pilots had no idea they had exceeded any flight parameters. They were merely trying to remain in position on a flight lead, trying to salvage a bad approach. Mr. Speaker, the bad approach was by the lead plane. This was the second plane. And again, he said the pilots had no idea they had exceeded any flight parameters. Mr. Speaker, as I said just a moment ago, they now have warning systems. And if the pilots today had exceeded any flight parameters, there would be a warning system going off. And the plane would not crash and 19 Marines would not burn to death. Mr. Speaker, again, I want to thank Congressman Steny Hoyer for joining in this effort to clear the names of these two Marines. I want to thank the families, Trish Brow and her two boys, and Connie Gruber and her little girl, Brooks, for continuing to say somebody's got to clear the names of these two men. They were outstanding pilots, Mr. Speaker. I've never had anyone in the Marine Corps tell me anything different than that John Brow and Brooks Gruber were outstanding pilots. But as I've said tonight, the environment of the times, Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney was opposed to the V-22 program. He wanted to eliminate the program. There were members in Congress and both parties that wanted to save the program. There was a fight going on. So when these two Marines crashed and the 17 Marines in the back of the plane that died, they sent out this press release that I just made mention of, and they never had a second press release that would have clearly have stated, based on the investigation, based on the Jagman report that we, the Marine Corps, have reviewed and signed by General McCorkle, that these two pilots were not at fault. They had not been trained. They did not understand vortex ring state. Bell Boeing didn't do its job. The Marine Corps didn't demand that Bell Boeing make this plane safe and how it would react to vortex ring state, and they didn't understand it. So for 10 years, actually 12 now, the crash was in 2000. For 10 years, there have been many people who have joined me in trying to say to the Marine Corps, you owe these two men, they deserve, and their families deserve, a letter from the Marine Corps stating that they were not at fault for this accident. And Mr. Speaker, again, all I can say, and I will continue to say to the Marine Corps, you have the utmost respect of the American people. They have great respect for the history of the Marine Corps and what the Marine Corps has done for our country in all the wars, just like the other services. But in this case, we're talking about the Marine Corps. And all the families want is one paragraph that clearly states that Colonel John Brow, pilot, was not at fault for the accident that occurred on April the 8th, 2000, Marana, Arizona. All Connie Gruber wants is the same letter, but with her husband's name. This is to certify that co-pilot Brooks Gruber, Major Brooks Gruber, was not at fault for the accident that occurred on April the 8th, 2000, Marana, Arizona. Mr. Speaker, this is a journey that I will not stop till we clear the names of these two pilots. The facts are on our side. There's so much more that I could say tonight. I have volumes, Mr. Speaker, I have the tape that Jim Furman presented in the lawsuit case. I have a copy of that given to me by Jim Furman. I've seen it all. I've seen the tape from Mike Wallace in 60 Minutes. I've talked to Jim Schaefer, Colonel Schaefer, now retired. He was in the air. There were 4 planes flying that night, and he was in the air. These were his buddies, John Brown, Brooks Gruber. He saw the plane crash. He's joined us in this effort to clear the names of Colonel John Brown and Major Brooks Gruber. I want to thank Chairman Buck McKeon and Ranking Member Adam Smith. They allowed language to be into the NDAA bill that basically says they hope that the Marine Corps will work to clear the names of these 2 pilots. And Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the press that has taken on this effort also. There's one thing about Voltaire said, and I quote Voltaire, "We owe the living our respect. We owe the dead the truth." And that's all this effort has ever been about, is trying to call on the Marine Corps, who the American people respect, I respect, to issue the letter to Trish Brown and Connie Gruber. And Mr. Speaker, all the lawsuits are over. And I look at this letter from Mike Morgan, and I don't read it because the first sentence is about me, but it says, "I applaud and fully support the extraordinary effort you have undertaken in support of John Brown, Brooks Gruber, and the families who lost loved ones in the tragic crash of Nighthawk 72. Let me read just a couple more, and then I'm going to close, Mr. Speaker. This is from Phil Stackhouse. He says, "I do not believe," and again, this was one of the 3 investigators. He said, "I do not believe that it would be a surprise to anyone that it is my opinion the mishap was not a result of pilot error, but was the result of a perfect storm of circumstances." Mr. Speaker, that's what I'm talking about. They did not understand vortex ring state. The manufacturer didn't understand it. The Marine Corps didn't understand it, so they couldn't train the pilots to understand it. That's what Major Stackhouse meant by a perfect storm of circumstances. During the conduct of this investigation, we collected some 20 binders of evidence, including, among other things, maintenance records, training records, telemetry records, operational and testing records, and dozens of photographs. This includes, he further states, this includes, for an example, compressed testing and evaluation created by deadlines, funding, and maintenance. Mr. Speaker, that's what he's talking about, is at that particular time when this plane was up and going to Arizona, they were cutting programs to test the plane. You had Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney trying to kill the program. They did everything they could. I don't blame the Marine Corps for trying to save the program. They believed that this was a helicopter of the present and the future. But he further stated, the action of the lead aircraft in this section and lack of understanding of how vortex ring state and power settling would affect the Osprey in the real world was part of the problem. I do not feel that our investigation reflects that the mishap was a result of pilot error, and if the investigation was interpreted that way, it was misinterpreted. Mr. Speaker, this is one of the 3 investigators that all wrote about the same letter. And Phil Stackhouse closed by saying this. Major Stackhouse said this, "For any record that reflects the mishap was a result of pilot error, it should be corrected. For any publication that reflects the mishap was a result of pilot error, it should be corrected and recanted." Mr. Speaker, I've had the privilege and the pleasure to meet Major Brooks Gruber's daddy and mom. They live in Florida. One time after the accident, they came to Jacksonville, North Carolina, and Connie Gruber invited me to the First Baptist Church of Jacksonville, and it's one of those falls where they have reunions. And I never will forget, after the church service, Connie said, "I want you to meet my father-in-law." And I went out and met Mr. Gruber. And Mr. Speaker, he was a Marine who fought in Korea for this country. And we were in the vestibule of the First Baptist Church in Jacksonville. He said, "I want to shake your hand." And with tears in his eyes, he said, "Congressman, I cannot thank you enough for trying to clear my son's name." Mr. Speaker, I've stayed in touch with Mr. Gruber from time to time to let him know we're making progress. We know we're not there yet, but we keep beating this drum, the drum saying, "Clear the name, clear the names, clear the names, clear the names." I called Trish Brow last week to tell her that WTVD wanted to come up and interview her about the accident. And it happened to be a tough day, Mr. Speaker, because her father-in-law, who's 80 years old, was having surgery. But I'm pleased to report that the surgery went well. I want Mr. Brow, Sr., and his family, I want Mr. Gruber, Sr. and his family to see the letter that we're asking the Marine Corps to send to the two wives. Both men are in their 80s. So I will read one more time before closing, Mr. Speaker. For any record that reflects the mishap was a result of pilot error, it should be corrected. For any publication that reflects the mishap was a result of pilot error, it should be corrected and recanted. All three of the investigators, Colonel Mike Morgan, Colonel Ron Radish, Major Phil Stackhouse, have all written me letters and said the same thing. Our Jagman report says the pilots were not at fault. Mr. Speaker, we're going to keep battling this thing for the families. And I will say we're getting closer, because I have such faith in God Almighty that I know that it's God's will that these two pilots who are dead and their families who are living deserve to have their names cleared. And I just call on the Marine Corps to do what's right for your Marines. Do what's right for the Marines. Forget the congressman. He just happens to be the foot soldier. But do what's right for the two Marines who are dead. Do what's right for the 17 Marines who were in the back of the plane who are dead. And do what's right for the families of the pilot and co-pilot. Mr. Speaker, with that, I want to thank you and the staff who stayed here tonight to give me this chance to share my concern, my heart. And I'll ask God to please touch the hearts of those in the United States Marine Corps to look at the face of Colonel John Brow, pilot, and the face of Major Brooks Gruber, co-pilot, and call on the Marine Corps to write the letters to the families and to publicly say that the Jagman report has cleared these two pilots' names, and we, the Marine Corps, could have 8 years ago issued a press release to the nation saying that these two pilots were not at fault. If they'd done that, Mr. Speaker, I would not be on the floor tonight. Mr. Speaker, I close it as I always do from the bottom of my heart for all those fighting in Afghanistan. God, please bless the families of our men and women in uniform. Please, God, bless those who are serving our nation. And God, those who have lost loved ones in Afghanistan and Iraq, hold them in your arms, dear God. Give them comfort. God, please bless the House and Senate that we will do what is right in the eyes of God. Please bless President Obama that he will do what is right in the eyes of God for God's people. And 3 times I'll say in closing, God, please, God, please, God, please continue to bless America. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Ontario State. Gentleman's yield back. Does the gentleman have a motion?
Yes, sir. I make a motion that the House now adjourn for the evening.
Thank you. There being no other designees to speak, the question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until the hour of 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.